The crack of leather against flesh echoed through the Waldorf Grand Ballroom like a gunshot. 300 guests in designer gowns and $1,000 suits stood frozen, champagne glasses trembling in their hands as Marcus Blackwell raised the antique riding crop again. His wife Elena crumpled on the marble stage, her evening gown torn, blood seeping through the silk as she wrapped both arms around her swollen belly. "Please," she whispered. "The baby." Marcus brought the whip down again. "But we're getting ahead of ourselves. This story doesn't begin with violence. It begins 3 years earlier with a lie that looked like love. Eleanor Rodriguez had never imagined marrying into wealth. At 24, she worked as a procurement specialist for a mid-sized logistics company, living in a modest apartment in Brooklyn, sending money home to her parents in New Jersey every month. Her father, Thomas Rodriguez, ran his manufacturing business quietly, never flaunting success, never seeking the spotlight. He taught Elena that real power whispered while weakness shouted. She met Marcus at a corporate networking event. He swept into the room like he owned it, which in a sense he did. Blackwell Investments had stakes in half the companies present. When he approached Elena at the bar, his smile was warm, his attention flattering, his interest seemingly genuine. "You look bored," he said, ordering her another glass of wine without asking what she wanted. She should have noticed that detail, the way he decided for her, the way he positioned himself between her and the exit, the way his compliments felt less like appreciation and more like acquisition. But she was young, and he was magnetic, and within 6 months, they were engaged. The wedding was spectacular. 200 guests at the Plaza Hotel. Her parents seemed uncomfortable among the hedge fund managers and society wives, but Thomas shook Marcus's hand firmly and told Elena he just wanted her to be happy. "If he ever makes you unhappy," Thomas said quietly during their father-daughter dance, "you call me day or night, you understand?" Eleanor laughed. "Dad, I'm fine. Marcus loves me." Thomas didn't smile back. "Promise me, mija." "I promise." It was a promise she would break for 3 long years. The first time Marcus hit her was 4 months after the wedding. She'd forgotten to pick up his dry cleaning, distracted by a crisis at work. He slapped her across the face with such casual efficiency that she wondered if he'd done it before, to someone else. "Don't ever embarrass me like that again," he said calmly, then went back to reading the Wall Street Journal. Eleanor stood in their bedroom, hand pressed to her burning cheek, trying to process what had just happened. This wasn't real. This didn't happen to women like her. This didn't happen with men like Marcus, who donated to children's hospitals and sat on charity boards. She told herself it was a one-time thing. Stress. A bad day. He apologized later. With flowers and a diamond bracelet and promises it would never happen again. It happened again 2 weeks later. Then again. Then so often, she stopped counting. Marcus was careful. He never hit her where it would show, never in front of the staff, though they must have suspected. The housekeeper, Margaret Pierce, started leaving ice packs in the bathroom. The driver, James, held doors open for Elena with eyes full of pity she pretended not to see. Eleanor learned the rules of her marriage quickly. Don't question Marcus. Don't contradict him in public. Don't have opinions that differed from his. Don't talk too long to other men. Don't smile too much or too little. Don't gain weight. Don't dress too provocatively or too conservatively. Don't breathe wrong. She stopped calling her parents. Thomas would know something was wrong the moment he heard her voice, and Marcus monitored her phone anyway. When her mother tried to visit, Elena made excuses. Work was busy. They were travelling. The apartment was being renovated. Always something. The isolation was its own kind of violence. Then Elena discovered she was pregnant. She stared at the positive test for 20 minutes, terror and hope warring in her chest. A baby, a child who would depend on her. Marcus's child. What kind of father would he be? What kind of mother could she be, trapped in this gilded cage? When she told Marcus, his reaction surprised her. He was thrilled. He pulled her into an embrace so tender she almost remembered why she'd fallen for him in the first place. "This is perfect," he said. "A Blackwell heir. God, Elena, this is everything." For 2 blissful months, Marcus was different, attentive, gentle. He accompanied her to doctor's appointments and held her hand during the ultrasound. When they learned the baby was a girl, he actually cried. Elena let herself hope. Maybe fatherhood would change him. Maybe the violence was behind them. Maybe they could be a real family. That hope died on a Tuesday afternoon in her 6th month. Marcus came home from work in a rage. A deal had fallen through. Someone had cost him $12 million. Eleanor was reading pregnancy books on the couch when he stormed in, and she made the mistake of not greeting him quickly enough. The first kick caught her in the ribs. The second narrowly missed her stomach. She curled into a ball, protecting the baby, screaming for him to stop. He did stop, eventually. Then he stood over her, breathing hard, and said, "Don't ever make me do that again." As if she'd forced his foot into her ribs. As if she'd choreographed her own beating. Eleanor spent that night on the bathroom floor, one hand on her belly, feeling the baby kick and praying those kicks wouldn't stop. She should leave. She should call the police. She should call her father. But Marcus controlled everything. The money, the apartment, her credit cards. He'd made her quit her job 6 months into their marriage. Where would she go? How would she support a baby? And if she did leave, what would Marcus do? He'd told her once, casually, that if she ever tried to take his child away, he'd make sure she never saw daylight again. She believed him, so she stayed. She covered her bruises with makeup and wore long sleeves in summer and learned to flinch before the blow landed. By her 7th month, Elena moved through her life like a ghost. The penthouse apartment was enormous and empty. Marcus worked 16-hour days, attended endless galas and fundraisers, played the role of visionary businessman to perfection. In public, he was charm itself, one hand protective on Elena's lower back, the other shaking hands and making deals. Behind closed doors, he was a monster. The staff knew. They had to know. Margaret started leaving her phone number written on note cards hidden in Elena's drawer. James gave her meaningful looks in the rearview mirror. The doorman Carlos always asked if she was okay with a weight to the question that suggested he knew she wasn't. But knowing and doing something about it were different things. Marcus Blackwell had power, real power, the kind that made prosecutors hesitate and judges recuse themselves, the kind that made witnesses forget what they'd seen and victims afraid to speak. The Friday before the Autumn Hope Charity Gala, Marcus sat Eleanor down with a list of rules for the evening. Smile, but not too much. Talk to his business associates, but don't bore them. Wear the dress he'd selected. Don't drink alcohol, obviously, but hold a glass so people wouldn't ask questions. Stand when he stood. Sit when he told her to. Be the perfect accessory. "This event is important," Marcus said, scrolling through his phone while he talked. "Senator Williams will be there, the Chens, potentially the governor. I need you flawless, Elena. Can you manage that?" "Yes," she whispered. "Good." He finally looked up at her, and his eyes were cold. "Because if you embarrass me, if you make one mistake, I promise you'll regret it." That night, Elena lay awake, the baby doing somersaults against her ribs. She placed both hands on her belly and made a silent promise. "I'll protect you," she whispered. "No matter what, I'll find a way to get us out of this." She didn't know it then, but she wouldn't have to find a way. In 48 hours, everything would shatter and the truth would spill out in the worst possible way, in front of the worst possible audience. The Autumn Hope Charity Gala was always held at the Waldorf Grand, a venue dripping with old money and older secrets. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light over a sea of designer gowns and immaculate tuxedos. Politicians mingled with tech moguls. Actresses posed for photographers. Waiters glided between conversations carrying trays of champagne and canapes that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Eleanor stood in front of the bedroom mirror, adjusting the midnight blue gown Marcus had chosen. It was beautiful, she supposed, in a suffocating way. The fabric clung to her pregnant belly, announcing her condition to the world. Marcus liked that. He liked people knowing he'd claimed her, marked her, bred her. The thought made her stomach turn. "You look presentable," Marcus said, appearing behind her. He was already dressed, looking every inch the successful financier in his custom Tom Ford tuxedo. "Remember the rules." "I remember." His hand closed around her wrist, tight enough to hurt. "No mistakes tonight, Elena. I mean it." She nodded, and he released her, satisfied. The drive to the Waldorf was silent except for Marcus reviewing his talking points for potential investors. Elena stared out the window at the city lights, feeling like a prisoner being transported to her execution. James caught her eye in the rearview mirror and she saw something there, a question, an offer of help. She looked away. The ballroom was already crowded when they arrived. Heads turned. People approached. Marcus transformed instantly into his public persona, all warmth and charisma, his hand possessive on Elena's lower back. "Marcus, wonderful to see you," Senator Williams boomed, pumping Marcus's hand. "And, Elena, you're glowing. Pregnancy suits you." "Thank you, Senator," she said quietly. They moved through the crowd like royalty. Marcus introduced her to people whose names she immediately forgot. Everyone wanted something from him. Access, investments, favors. He dispensed promises like a king granting audiences. Eleanor's feet ached in her heels. Her back throbbed. The baby was active tonight, kicking hard enough to make her wince. She wanted to sit down, but Marcus had told her to stand, so she stood. Across the room she saw Rebecca Sterling, Marcus's executive assistant. The woman was beautiful in a predatory way, all sharp angles and sharper ambition. She caught Elena looking and smiled, a knife blade of a smile that said she knew exactly what went on in the Blackwell penthouse and found it amusing. Elena knew about the affair. She'd known for months. Part of her was grateful. Every night Marcus spent with Rebecca was a night he didn't spend hurting her. The evening dragged on. Dinner was served, 7 courses of food Elena couldn't eat. Her stomach was in knots, anxiety crawling under her skin like insects. Something felt wrong, different. Marcus had been drinking heavily, his face flushed, his charm edging into aggression. Then the auction began. The Autumn Hope Gala raised money for various children's charities, and the auction was the highlight. Items ranged from vacation packages to signed sports memorabilia to vintage collectibles. The crowd was generous, competitive, bidding with the casual extravagance of people for whom money was just a number. Lot 17 was an antique riding crop, supposedly owned by some European aristocrat. The auctioneer made jokes about its history while models displayed it. People laughed. The bidding started. Eleanor reached for her water glass. Her hand was shaking, though she didn't know why. As she lifted the glass, someone jostled her from behind. Water sloshed, then a few drops of red wine from a passing waiter's tray splashed across Marcus's pristine white shirt cuff. Time stopped. Marcus looked down at the stain, then at Elena, then back at the stain. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. "You clumsy bitch," he said quietly. People nearby turned to look. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. "Marcus, I'm sorry, it was an accident. Someone bumped me." "I told you," he said, his voice still calm, still quiet, which somehow made it worse. "Not to embarrass me tonight." "I didn't mean to. Please, it's just a few drops of wine." Marcus stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the marble floor. Conversations around them faltered. The auctioneer paused, mid-sentence. Eleanor felt 300 pairs of eyes turn toward them. "Stand up," Marcus commanded. Eleanor rose on shaking legs. Her hands instinctively moved to protect her belly. "Marcus, please, let's go outside and talk about this." He grabbed her arm, fingers digging into flesh hard enough to leave bruises. "You want to talk? Fine. Let's talk where everyone can hear." He dragged her toward the stage. Eleanor stumbled, her heels catching on her gown. People gasped, but no one moved to help. They knew Marcus Blackwell. They knew better. "Marcus, stop," she pleaded. "You're hurting me." He pulled her up the steps onto the stage, right where the auction items were displayed. The auctioneer backed away, confused and frightened. The spotlight was blinding. Eleanor could barely see the crowd, but she felt their stares, hundreds of them, boring into her. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus announced, his voice carrying across the ballroom. "I apologize for the interruption, but I think it's time we addressed something that's been bothering me all evening." Eleanor's blood turned to ice. "Marcus, don't do this." "My wife," he continued, gesturing at her like she was one of the auction items, "doesn't seem to understand respect, doesn't understand her place. I've tried to be patient, I've tried to be understanding, but patience has its limits." Senator Williams stood. "Marcus, maybe we should take this somewhere private." "No." Marcus's smile was terrible. "I'm tired of privacy. I'm tired of pretending everything is perfect. Elena needs to learn a lesson, and all of you are going to witness it." He reached for the antique riding crop still on display. Elena backed away. "Marcus, No, please think about the baby. I am thinking about the baby, he said, testing the crop's weight in his hand. I'm thinking about what kind of mother you'll be if you can't even follow simple instructions. The first strike came without warning. The leather caught her across the shoulders, and Elena cried out, stumbling forward. The crowd gasped, but still, impossibly, no one moved. They were paralyzed by shock, by Marcus's power, by the sheer unreality of what was happening. "Stop!" someone shouted from the back. "Someone call the police!" Marcus ignored them. The second strike landed across Elena's back. The third caught her arm as she tried to shield herself. She fell to her knees, curling around her belly, protecting the baby with her own body. "Please," she sobbed. "Stop! You're going to hurt her!" "You should have thought of that before you disrespected me." The beating continued. 10 strikes, 20. Eleanor lost count after 30. The pain was everywhere, burning across her back, her arms, her legs. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only pray that her daughter was okay, that the baby could survive this. Blood seeped through her gown. Someone in the crowd was screaming. Women were crying. But the men, the powerful men who could have stopped this, stood frozen, afraid of Marcus Blackwell's reach, of what he might do to their businesses, their careers, their families. Rebecca Sterling watched from the front row, a small smile playing at her lips. At strike 43, Eleanor stopped moving. At strike 67, the ballroom doors burst open. Thomas Rodriguez had been in Chicago on business when he got the text from Margaret. 3 words. "Gala, help Eleanor." He'd chartered a plane immediately, breaking every speed limit from the airport to the Waldorf. He burst into the ballroom with his head of security, David Chen, and his attorney, Lisa Morrison, behind him. What he saw would haunt him for the rest of his life. His daughter, 7 months pregnant, lay motionless on the stage in a pool of blood while Marcus Blackwell stood over her with a whip. Thomas didn't think. He roared, a sound of pure rage that shook the chandeliers and charged the stage. David was faster, tackling Marcus before he could land another blow. The riding crop clattered across the marble. Thomas dropped to his knees beside Elena. "Mia, oh God, Mia, I'm here. You're going to be okay." Eleanor's eyes fluttered open. Blood trickled from her mouth. "Papa," she whispered. "The baby." "Lisa, call an ambulance," Thomas shouted. Then louder to the frozen crowd, "Which one of you cowards called the police? No? None of you?" Senator Williams finally found his voice. "Thomas, I didn't know. We didn't realize." "You stood there and watched," Thomas snarled. "Every single one of you watched a man beat his pregnant wife and did nothing." David had Marcus pinned to the floor. Marcus was laughing, actually laughing. "You can't touch me, Thomas. You know who I am. You know what I can do." "You're finished," Thomas said quietly. The promise in those words was absolute. "You just ended yourself, and you're too stupid to realize it." Sirens wailed in the distance. Thomas carefully lifted Elena into his arms. She was so light, so fragile. How had he not noticed? How had he not seen that his vibrant daughter had been hollowed out by fear and pain? "I'm sorry," he whispered against her hair. "I'm so sorry I didn't protect you." "Papa," Elena breathed. "The baby. Save the baby. We're saving both of you." The ambulance arrived. Paramedics swarmed the stage with a stretcher and medical equipment. They worked quickly, efficiently, while Thomas refused to let go of Elena's hand. He climbed into the ambulance with her, leaving David to deal with Marcus and the police. As they pulled away from the Waldorf, Thomas looked back at the building. Through the glass doors, he could see the crowd spilling onto the sidewalk, phones out, recording, photographing. The secret was out. The perfect facade had shattered. Good. Marcus Blackwell had just declared war on the wrong family, and Thomas Rodriguez was about to show the world exactly what happened to men who hurt his daughter. St. Catherine's Hospital was the best in the city, and Thomas made sure Eleanor got the best of everything. The trauma team rushed her into surgery immediately. The baby's heartbeat was weak but present. Eleanor had lost a dangerous amount of blood. She'd sustained lacerations across 40% of her body. Several ribs were cracked. Her blood pressure was critically high. Thomas paced the surgical waiting room like a caged animal. David arrived with Lisa 20 minutes later, both of them grim-faced. "The police arrested Marcus," David reported. "He's being held at the precinct. His lawyers are already there, demanding his release. He's not getting released, Thomas said flatly. Lisa, I want every resource we have on this. I want him destroyed, financially, legally, socially, everything. Lisa opened her laptop. Already started. I've reached out to the district attorney. Given the public nature of the assault and the number of witnesses, they're treating this as a priority case. I'm also contacting the media directly. This needs to be the story everywhere by morning. What about Elena's testimony? David asked. We'll need it eventually, Lisa said. But we have 300 witnesses who watched Marcus Blackwell beat his pregnant wife with a whip. We have it on video from at least 20 phones. We have medical evidence. Even without Elena's statement, we can bury him. Thomas stopped pacing. I want more than a conviction. I want him to lose everything. His company, his reputation, his freedom. Everything he used to control her. Leave that to me, Lisa said. Her smile was cold. I'm very good at my job. Hours passed. Thomas sat with his head in his hands, praying to a God he wasn't sure he believed in anymore. Eleanor's mother, Maria, arrived from New Jersey, her face streaked with tears. She collapsed into Thomas's arms. Our baby, she sobbed. How did we not know? He isolated her, Thomas said, his voice broken. He cut her off from us systematically. I should have pushed harder, should have insisted on seeing her. We both should have. At 3 a.m, the surgeon finally emerged. Dr. Sarah Kim looked exhausted, but cautiously optimistic. Elena is stable. The baby is stable. It was close, but they're both fighters. Thomas's legs nearly gave out. Can we see her? She's in recovery once she's moved to a room, yes. But Thomas. Dr. Kim's expression turned serious. The physical injuries will heal. The psychological trauma is going to take much longer. What Eleanor went through tonight, what she's clearly been going through for years, that kind of abuse leaves scars we can't see. She's going to need intensive support, therapy, time, understanding. She'll have all of it, Maria promised. Whatever she needs. And the baby? Thomas asked. Baby girl is showing good vitals. We'll monitor closely, but I'm optimistic. Due date is still 2 months out. We want to avoid early delivery if possible. When they finally allowed Thomas and Maria into Elena's room, she was awake but barely. Monitors beeped softly. IV lines ran into her arms. Bandages covered most of her visible skin. But she was alive. Maya, Thomas whispered, taking her hand carefully. How do you feel? Tired, Eleanor murmured. Then her eyes flew open with sudden panic. The baby, Papa, is she okay? She's okay, you're both okay. Eleanor started crying, deep, wrenching sobs that shook her battered body. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I should have told you. I should have left him. I was just so scared. Maria stroked her daughter's hair. Shh, mi amor. You have nothing to apologize for. Nothing. This is not your fault. I thought I could handle it, Elena whispered. I thought if I was just perfect enough, if I followed all his rules, he'd stop. But he never stopped. He only got worse. Thomas felt rage burn through him again, hot and cleansing. He's never going to touch you again. I promise you that. He's never going to hurt another woman again. He has power, Papa, more than you know. He has judges, politicians, people who owe him favors. I don't care. Thomas leaned forward. Listen to me, Elena. I'm going to tell you something I've never told you before. Rodriguez Manufacturing isn't just manufacturing. We're one of the largest defense contractors in the country. We supply equipment to the military, to federal agencies, to governments around the world. I keep a low profile because that's how I prefer to operate. But I have resources Marcus Blackwell can't even imagine. And I'm going to use every single one to bury him. Eleanor stared at her father. In all her years, she'd known him as a successful businessman, but she'd never understood the true scope of his influence. Papa, I don't want you to do anything illegal. Everything I do will be perfectly legal, Thomas assured her. But that doesn't mean it won't be devastating. Marcus built his empire on other people's fear and secrets. I'm very good at uncovering secrets. Over the next 72 hours, the Blackwell scandal consumed the city. The video from the gala went viral within hours. By morning, it had been viewed 40 million times. News networks played it on loop, some blurring the most violent moments, others showing everything. The hashtag Justice for Elena trended worldwide. Marcus's lawyers tried damage control. They released a statement claiming the video was misleading, taken out of context, that Marcus had been defending himself from Elena's erratic behavior. No one believed them. The evidence was too clear, the brutality too obvious. Lisa Morrison worked around the clock, coordinating with the district attorney's office, organizing witness testimonies, building an airtight case, but she also did something else, something Thomas had specifically requested. She started digging into Marcus Blackwell's business dealings. What she found was astonishing. Marcus's company, Blackwell Investments, looked legitimate on the surface, but underneath it was rotten with corruption, shell companies in the Caymans, insider trading, tax fraud, money laundering for a Russian oligarch under sanctions, embezzlement from his own investors. The list went on and on. Lisa brought her findings to Thomas in Eleanor's hospital room on day 3. Eleanor was stronger now, able to sit up, though she still couldn't walk without pain. The baby was doing well, moving actively, reminding them all what they were fighting for. "This is enough to put him away for 20 years, even without the assault charges," Lisa said, spreading documents across the bedside table. "Financial crimes, fraud, racketeering. The FBI is very interested." Eleanor picked up one of the documents, her hand shaking. "He made me sign things, papers I didn't understand. He said they were just routine financial stuff, but I think he was using me." "Do you remember what you signed?" Lisa asked gently. "Some of it. There were transfer forms, offshore account paperwork. He'd put the documents in front of me at night when I was exhausted or scared and tell me to sign. I was too afraid to refuse." "That's forgery," Lisa said. "If he forced your signature or manipulated you into signing under duress, those documents are invalid. Plus, it's another crime we can charge him with." Thomas watched his daughter carefully. She looked fragile, but there was something new in her eyes. Anger, determination, the beginnings of strength reclaimed. "I want to testify," Eleanor said suddenly. "When this goes to trial, I want to tell everyone what he did. Not just at the gala. Everything." "Eleanor, you don't have to," Maria said. "The case is strong enough without you." "I know, but I want to. For me. And for every other woman who's too scared to speak up." Eleanor touched her belly. "I want my daughter to know her mother fought back." Thomas felt pride surge through him. "Then we'll make sure you get that chance." But Marcus wasn't going down without a fight. Despite the overwhelming evidence, despite the public outrage, his legal team managed to get him released on a $10 million bail. The judge, an old friend of Marcus's, set minimal restrictions. House arrest at his penthouse, electronic monitoring, no contact with Eleanor. The news of his release sparked protests. Hundreds of people gathered outside the courthouse, chanting, holding signs demanding justice. Women's advocacy groups called for the judge's resignation. The mayor issued a statement supporting Elena, but Marcus was free, and that terrified Elena. "He's going to come after me," she told Thomas that night. "He won't accept this. He'll find a way. He's being monitored. He can't leave his apartment, and David has stationed security outside your room 24/7. You're safe. You don't understand. Marcus always finds a way." She was right to be afraid. 2 days after his release, Rebecca Sterling held a press conference. Standing in front of cameras, poised and articulate, she painted a picture of Elena as mentally unstable, manipulative, possibly violent herself. "I worked closely with Marcus for 5 years, Rebecca said, her voice full of manufactured concern. "And I witnessed Elena's increasingly erratic behaviour. She had severe mood swings. She made threats. She was obsessed with the idea that Marcus was trying to control her, when in reality he was trying to get her help. What happened at the gala was tragic, but it was the culmination of a very complex situation. The media ate it up. Suddenly the narrative shifted. Maybe Elena wasn't the innocent victim. Maybe there was more to the story. Maybe Marcus had been pushed to his breaking point." Eleanor watched the press conference from her hospital bed and felt the old fear creeping back. This was what Marcus did. He twisted reality until people doubted their own eyes. "Don't let her get in your head," Lisa said. "We knew they'd try this. That's why we've been collecting testimony from other sources." "What other sources?" Lisa smiled. Margaret Pierce, your housekeeper, has agreed to testify. So has James, your driver. We've also tracked down 3 of Marcus's former girlfriends. All of them report similar patterns of abuse. They're willing to come forward. With protection, yes, Marcus terrorized a lot of people over the years, but now that he's exposed, they're ready to speak up. The dam is breaking, Elena. Everyone he silenced is finding their voice. The case against Marcus expanded daily. Financial analysts dissected Blackwell investments and found fraud at every level. His investors filed lawsuits. His board of directors forced him to resign. His assets were frozen pending criminal investigation. The empire he'd built over 15 years was collapsing. But the most damaging testimony came from an unexpected source. Dr. Nathaniel Price had been Marcus's private physician for a decade. He'd treated Marcus for various ailments and had, over the years, also treated Elena. When federal investigators approached him with a warrant, Dr. Price's conscience finally won over his confidentiality obligations. He provided medical records documenting Elena's injuries over 3 years: fractured ribs, concussions, bruising consistent with battery, defensive wounds on her forearms. Each time Elena had claimed to be clumsy, to have fallen, to have had an accident. Each time Dr. Price had noted in his private files that he suspected domestic violence, but the patient refused intervention. "I should have done more," Dr. Price told Lisa during his deposition. "I knew what was happening, but Marcus was a powerful man and Eleanor was terrified. I documented everything in case she ever found the courage to come forward. I'm relieved she finally did." The records were devastating. They showed a clear pattern of escalating violence. They corroborated Elena's story completely. They proved this wasn't a one-time incident, but a sustained campaign of terror. 2 weeks after the gala, Eleanor was finally discharged from the hospital. She couldn't return to the penthouse she'd shared with Marcus, so Thomas moved her into his estate in Connecticut. The property was heavily secured, surrounded by walls and guards. Eleanor had her own wing, decorated by Maria to feel warm and safe. It was strange living with her parents again at 27, pregnant and broken, but it was also healing. Maria cooked her favourite meals. Thomas sat with her in the evenings, talking about everything except Marcus. Slowly, carefully, Eleanor began to remember who she'd been before the marriage, before the fear. She also began therapy. Dr. Jennifer Wu specialised in trauma recovery for domestic violence survivors. 3 times a week, Eleanor sat in Dr. Wu's office and unravelled 3 years of horror. "What Marcus did to you is called coercive control," Dr. Wu explained. "It's a pattern of behaviour designed to strip away your autonomy, your sense of self. The physical violence is just one component. The isolation, the monitoring, the rules, the degradation, that's all part of how he maintained power over you." "I feel so stupid," Elena whispered. "How did I let this happen?" "You didn't let anything happen. He systematically dismantled your defences. It's not a failing on your part, it's a testament to his calculated cruelty. Will I ever feel normal again? You'll feel yourself again, it takes time. But Eleanor, you're already stronger than you realise. You survived. You protected your daughter. You found the courage to let people help you. That's not weakness. That's extraordinary strength." The baby became Eleanor's anchor. Every kick, every hiccup, every flutter reminded her why she had to keep fighting. This little girl deserved a life free from violence, free from fear. Elena would give her that no matter what it took. As Elena healed, the legal machine ground forward. The district attorney, Karen Mitchell, built a case that was virtually bulletproof. She charged Marcus with attempted murder, aggravated assault, child endangerment, multiple counts of domestic battery, fraud, embezzlement, tax evasion, and money laundering. The list was staggering. "We're going to trial in 8 weeks, Karen told Elena during a meeting at the Rodriguez estate. "I know that feels fast, but we want to move while public attention is still high and before Marcus's lawyers can muddy the waters further." 8 weeks, Elena repeated. "I'll be 9 months pregnant." "I know. We can try to delay if you need more time." "No." Eleanor's voice was firm. "I want this done. I want him locked away before my daughter is born. She deserves to come into a world where her father can't hurt her mother." Karen studied her. "You're sure you want to testify? It's going to be brutal. Marcus's lawyers will try to destroy you on the stand." "I'm sure." The trial became the most publicized case in recent history. Every major news outlet covered it. The courthouse required extra security to manage the crowds. Women's groups held vigils outside. Protesters carried signs supporting Eleanor and demanding justice. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was electric. Marcus sat at the defense table in an expensive suit, looking calm and confident. His legal team, headed by the notorious defense attorney Gregory Stone, exuded certainty. They believed they could win this. They were wrong. Karen Mitchell's opening statement was devastating. She played the gala video in its entirety. Several jurors looked away, visibly disturbed. One wiped tears from her eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen," Karen said, "what you just witnessed was not a moment of passion, not a regrettable mistake. It was the culmination of 3 years of systematic abuse. Over the next few weeks, you're going to hear from doctors, witnesses, experts, and the victim herself. You're going to see evidence of a man who used his wealth and power to torture his wife with impunity. And I'm going to ask you to hold him accountable." The prosecution's case unfolded methodically. Dr. Kim testified about Eleanor's injuries, showing medical photos that made several people in the gallery gasp. Margaret Pierce described finding Elena unconscious in the bathroom after a beating. James talked about the fear in Elena's eyes every time she got in the car. The former girlfriends shared their own stories of Marcus's violence. One of Marcus's ex-girlfriends, a woman named Jennifer Walsh, testified through tears about the 3 years she'd spent with him before Eleanor. "He broke my jaw once because I laughed at the wrong moment during dinner with his clients," Jennifer said, her voice shaking. "When I tried to leave, he threatened to destroy my career. I was a junior associate at a law firm he had connections with. Within a week of breaking up with him, I was fired. I couldn't get another job in the city for 2 years. He blacklisted me everywhere." Gregory Stone tried to discredit her during cross-examination. "Ms. Walsh, isn't it true you've struggled with substance abuse?" "After my relationship with Marcus ended, yes, I developed a drinking problem to cope with the PTSD. So your memory of these events might be compromised?" "My memory is crystal clear," Jennifer shot back. "You don't forget the face of the man who hospitalized you." The medical records Dr. Price provided were entered into evidence, page after page documenting injuries Elena had sustained over 3 years. The jury examined them in silence, their faces growing harder with each report. Then came the financial evidence. FBI forensic accountant Daniel Martinez spent 2 full days walking the jury through Marcus's web of fraud. Shell companies, falsified documents, stolen investor funds, money laundering schemes that connected Marcus to international criminal networks. "Mr. Blackwell didn't just abuse his wife," Daniel testified. "He abused the trust of hundreds of investors, stealing approximately $200 million over 5 years. He used his wife's signature, often forged or obtained under duress, to legitimize many of these transactions." Gregory Stone fought hard during cross-examinations, but the evidence was overwhelming. He tried to paint Elena as complicit in the financial crimes, suggesting she'd knowingly participated in the fraud. "Isn't it convenient," Stone argued during one particularly heated exchange, "that Mrs. Blackwell claims ignorance of these financial dealings while her signature appears on dozens of documents?" Karen objected immediately. "Your Honor, the prosecution has already established that those signatures were obtained through coercion and fraud." "Sustained," Judge Patricia Morrison ruled. "Mr. Stone, move on." But Stone wouldn't let it go. He called a handwriting expert who testified that some of the signatures appeared genuine. He suggested Eleanor had been aware of the fraud and was now using the abuse allegations to avoid prosecution herself. It was a desperate strategy, and it wasn't working. The jury looked skeptical. The evidence of abuse was too clear, too documented, too corroborated by multiple witnesses. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for: Eleanor's testimony. She was 8.5 months pregnant now, moving slowly, one hand always protective on her belly. Thomas wanted to be in the courtroom, but Eleanor had asked him to wait outside. She needed to do this on her own. Karen helped her to the witness stand. Eleanor placed her hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. Then she sat, facing a courtroom full of strangers and cameras, with Marcus watching her from 20 feet away. For a moment, the old fear tried to claw its way back. Marcus's eyes were cold, calculating, threatening. She could almost hear his voice in her head. "You'll regret this. You know what I can do." But then the baby kicked hard, and Elena remembered why she was here. "Please state your name for the record," Karen said gently. "Elena Rodriguez Blackwell." Her voice was stronger than she expected. "Elena, how did you meet Marcus Blackwell?" And so she told her story, from the beginning, leaving nothing out. The whirlwind courtship, the first time he hit her, the rules, the isolation, the escalating violence, every beating, every threat, every moment of terror. The courtroom was silent except for her voice. Several people were crying openly. The jury hung on every word. "Why didn't you leave?" Karen asked. The question wasn't accusatory, just gentle. "I was afraid," Eleanor said simply. "Marcus controlled everything. The money, the apartment, my phone, my email. He tracked my movements. He told me if I ever tried to leave, if I ever tried to take his child away, he would kill me. And I believed him because I'd seen what he was capable of. He once broke 3 of my ribs for forgetting to relay a phone message." "Tell us about the night of the gala." Eleanor took a deep breath. This was the hardest part. "I spilled a few drops of wine on his shirt. It was an accident. Someone bumped into me. But Marcus, he didn't care. He dragged me onto the stage in front of everyone. I kept thinking someone would stop him. All those powerful people, all those witnesses, surely someone would intervene. But no one did. No one did. He beat me with that whip, and I couldn't do anything except try to protect my baby. I remember thinking this was it. This was how I was going to die. On a stage in a ballroom full of people who were too afraid of my husband to help me." "What were you thinking about during the assault?" Eleanor's hand moved to her belly. "I was thinking about her, my daughter. I was praying she would survive, even if I didn't. I was begging God to let her live." Karen let that sink in. Then she said, "Eleanor, do you see the man who did this to you in this courtroom?" Eleanor looked directly at Marcus. He stared back, his face expressionless. Once that look would have terrified her. Now it just made her angry. "Yes. That's him, Marcus Blackwell, my husband, the father of my child, the man who spent 3 years destroying me." "No further questions, Your Honor." Gregory Stone's cross-examination was brutal, but Eleanor was ready for it. He tried to poke holes in her timeline, suggesting her memory was faulty. He brought up the times she'd lied to doctors about her injuries, implying she was a habitual liar. "Mrs. Blackwell, you told Dr. Kim you'd fallen down the stairs on at least 4 occasions. Were you lying then? Or are you lying now?" "I was lying then," Eleanor said calmly. "I lied because I was terrified of what Marcus would do if I told the truth." "How convenient that you're only telling the truth now, when you stand to gain financially from your husband's downfall." "I don't want his money," Eleanor said, her voice rising. "I want him away from me and my daughter. I want him to never hurt another woman again. That's all I want." Stone pressed harder, trying to break her, but Eleanor didn't break. She'd been broken by an expert, and she'd survived. A lawyer's questions couldn't touch her anymore. After 3 hours, Stone finally gave up. Eleanor stepped down from the witness stand, exhausted but intact. As she walked past the defense table, Marcus leaned forward and whispered something. She didn't hear the words, but she saw the hate in his eyes. She kept walking. Thomas was waiting outside the courtroom. He pulled her into a careful hug, mindful of her pregnancy. "I'm so proud of you, Mika." "I did it, Papa." I told the truth. "You did more than that. You gave a voice to every woman who's been too afraid to speak up." The trial continued for another week. The defense tried to present Marcus as a victim of his own success, a man under tremendous pressure who'd made a terrible mistake. They called character witnesses who testified about his charitable work, his business acumen, his contributions to society. But Karen dismantled each witness methodically. She showed that Marcus's charitable donations were tax write-offs. She demonstrated that his business success was built on fraud. She proved that the man Marcus pretended to be in public bore no resemblance to the monster he was in private. In his closing argument, Gregory Stone made one last desperate appeal. "Ladies and gentlemen, my client made a terrible mistake. He acted in a moment of passion and anger that he deeply regrets. But is that mistake enough to destroy his entire life? To take away his freedom, his livelihood, his future? We're not asking you to excuse what happened. We're asking you to see the complete picture of a complex man in a complex situation." Karen's closing argument was devastating. The defense wants you to see complexity where there is only cruelty. They want you to see a moment of passion where there was calculated violence. Marcus Blackwell beat his pregnant wife with a whip in front of 300 witnesses. That's not complex. That's criminal. But even if we set aside that night, even if we pretend the gala assault never happened, you still have 3 years of documented abuse. You have financial crimes totaling hundreds of millions of dollars. You have a pattern of behavior that shows Marcus Blackwell is not just a man who made a mistake. He's a man who systematically destroys anyone in his path. She paused, looking at each juror. Elena Rodriguez survived. Her daughter is going to survive. But how many other women might not survive if we let Marcus Blackwell walk free? Your verdict isn't just about one man. It's about whether we, as a society, will tolerate this kind of violence. I'm asking you to say no. Emphatically, completely, finally, no. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Eleanor waited in a private room with her parents, one hand on her belly, the other clutching her father's hand. The baby was very active today, as if she could sense the tension. "What if they don't convict him?" Elena whispered. "What if he walks away?" "They'll convict him," Thomas said with certainty. "I saw those jurors' faces. They believe you." When the bailiff finally called them back into the courtroom, Eleanor's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst. The jury filed in, their faces serious. Not one of them looked at Marcus. That was a good sign. Judge Morrison addressed the jury foreman. "Have you reached a verdict?" "We have, Your Honor." "On the charge of attempted murder, how do you find?" "Guilty." The courtroom erupted. Judge Morrison banged her gavel, calling for order. But the foreman kept reading. "On the charge of aggravated assault, guilty. On the charge of child endangerment, guilty. On all counts of domestic battery, guilty. On charges of fraud and embezzlement, guilty. On charges of money laundering, guilty. Guilty, guilty, guilty. 23 counts, and the jury convicted Marcus Blackwell on every single one. Eleanor felt her knees give way. Maria caught her, both of them crying. Thomas stood with his arms around them, tears streaming down his face. Around them, the gallery was chaos. People cheering, cameras flashing, reporters shouting questions. Marcus sat perfectly still at the defense table, his face blank. Gregory Stone was already filing papers for appeal, but everyone in that room knew it was over. Judge Morrison set sentencing for 2 weeks later. Those 2 weeks passed in a blur. The media declared Elena a hero. Women's advocacy groups held rallies in her honor. Survivors of domestic violence reached out to thank her for having the courage to speak up. The hashtag Justice for Elena was replaced with Justice Served. But Elena wasn't paying attention to any of it. She was focused on one thing: preparing for her daughter's arrival. Her due date was 5 days after sentencing. Dr. Kim warned that the stress might trigger early labor, so Eleanor was on modified bed rest at the Rodriguez estate. She spent her days reading baby books, preparing the nursery, trying to imagine a future that didn't include fear. Rebecca Sterling disappeared from public view after the verdict. Rumor had it she'd fled to Europe to avoid her own investigation for corporate fraud. Several of Marcus's business associates were being investigated. Blackwell Investments was being liquidated, with funds returned to defrauded investors. The empire had fallen. Sentencing day arrived cold and grey. Eleanor was enormous now, uncomfortable, ready for this pregnancy to be over. But she insisted on being present to hear Marcus's sentence. Thomas tried to talk her out of it. "Mia, you should be home resting. You don't need to see him again." "Yes, I do. I need to look him in the eyes when he's sent away. I need that closure." So they went to court one last time. The courtroom was packed again, every seat filled. Marcus was brought in wearing an orange jumpsuit, his hands cuffed. He looked smaller somehow, diminished. Prison had not been kind to him. Judge Morrison reviewed the case, the evidence, the impact statements from victims. Elena had written her own statement, and Karen read it aloud since Elena couldn't stand at the podium comfortably. "Marcus Blackwell stole 3 years of my life. He stole my sense of safety, my autonomy, my belief that I deserved to be treated with dignity. He tried to steal my future and my daughter's future, but he failed. I survived. My daughter will be born into freedom, not fear. And I hope that by standing up, by refusing to be silent, I've helped other women find the courage to leave their abusers. No amount of money, power, or status should protect someone from the consequences of violence." Judge Morrison looked at Marcus. "Mr. Blackwell, you have been convicted of crimes that span from intimate partner violence to large-scale financial fraud. The evidence presented in this trial painted a picture of a man who believed himself above the law, above common decency, above basic humanity. You terrorized your wife for years. You nearly killed her and your unborn child. You stole from investors who trusted you. You corrupted systems meant to protect people like Mrs. Blackwell." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "On the charges of attempted murder and aggravated assault, I sentence you to 25 years in state prison. On the charges of fraud and embezzlement, I sentence you to 15 years in federal prison to run consecutively. Total sentence, 40 years without possibility of parole for the first 25. The courtroom exploded again. 40 years. Marcus would be 78 years old before he was eligible for parole. His life, for all intents and purposes, was over. Marcus finally showed emotion. His face crumpled. He turned to look at Elena, and for just a moment, she saw fear in his eyes. The same fear he'd made her feel for 3 years. She felt nothing. No pity, no satisfaction, just relief. It was over. As they led Marcus away, he screamed at her, "This isn't finished, Elena! You hear me? This isn't over!" But it was. The doors closed behind him, and he was gone. Elena walked out of the courthouse into a crowd of reporters and supporters. People chanted her name. Cameras flashed. Questions flew at her from all directions. Thomas and David formed a protective barrier, escorting her to the car. As they drove away, Eleanor looked back at the courthouse one last time. Then she turned forward, toward home, toward her future. 3 days later, at 2 a.m, her water broke. The labor was long and difficult. 22 hours of pain that had nothing to do with Marcus, and everything to do with bringing new life into the world. Maria held one hand, Thomas held the other, and Dr. Kim coached her through each contraction. Finally, as dawn broke over Connecticut, Eleanor's daughter was born. She was perfect. 7 pounds, 4 ounces. A full head of dark hair, tiny fists that gripped Eleanor's finger with surprising strength. And when she opened her eyes, they were clear and bright and full of possibility. "What's her name?" Maria asked, tears streaming down her face. Eleanor looked at her daughter and knew. Hope. Her name is Hope. Because that's what this little girl represented. Hope for the future. Hope for healing. Hope that the cycle of violence could be broken. Eleanor held Hope close, breathing in that newborn smell, feeling the tiny heartbeat against her chest. "I'm your mother," she whispered, "and I promise you'll never know fear the way I did. You'll grow up strong and safe and loved. That's my promise to you." Hope made a small sound and Eleanor smiled, her first real, genuine smile in years. The media wanted interviews. Publishing houses offered book deals. Movie producers called with proposals. But Eleanor ignored all of it. She spent the first month after Hope's birth at the Rodriguez estate, healing, bonding with her daughter, learning to be a mother without fear hanging over every moment. Dr. Wu continued therapy sessions, helping Elena process the trauma. "You're going to have hard days," Dr. Wu warned. "PTSD doesn't disappear just because your abuser is in prison. You'll have triggers, flashbacks, moments of panic. That's normal. The key is not to fight those feelings, but to work through them." Eleanor did have hard days. Sometimes a sound would make her flinch. Sometimes she'd wake from nightmares of the gala, the whip, the blood. Sometimes she'd look at Hope and worry she'd be a terrible mother because she'd tolerated abuse for so long. But those moments became less frequent. And she learned to talk about them, to process them, to recognize them for what they were, echoes of trauma, not current reality. 6 months after Hope's birth, Eleanor finally felt ready to move forward in a new way. She met with Lisa Morrison and several women's advocacy groups to discuss starting a foundation. "I want to help other women leave abusive situations," Eleanor explained. "I had resources, family support, people who believed me, But so many women don't have those things. They're trapped by finances, by fear, by systems that don't protect them. I want to change that. The Hope Foundation launched 3 months later. Funded by Eleanor's divorce settlement, every penny of Marcus's remaining assets after restitution to his fraud victims, and additional donations from Thomas and other supporters, the foundation provided emergency housing, legal assistance, counselling, job training, and financial support to domestic violence survivors. Eleanor threw herself into the work. She spoke at conferences, testified before legislative committees, met with survivors who shared their own stories. She used her platform not to dwell on her own pain, but to shine a light on a problem that affected millions. People started calling her an advocate, a hero, a voice for the voiceless. Eleanor didn't feel like any of those things. She just felt like a woman who'd survived and wanted to help others do the same. On Hope's first birthday, Eleanor organised a celebration at the Rodriguez estate. Friends, family, foundation staff, and several survivors Elena had worked with over the past year gathered to celebrate not just a child's birth, but all they'd accomplished. Thomas gave a toast. A year ago, we almost lost Elena and Hope. A year ago, we were in the darkest place any family can be. But look at us now. Look at what my daughter has built from that darkness. She's saved lives. She's changed laws. She's given hope to people who thought they had none left. Mija, I've always been proud of you, but never more than I am right now. Eleanor held Hope, who was smashing cake into her face with delighted squeals, and looked around at the people who'd stood by her. Her parents, David and Lisa, Dr. Wu, Margaret and James, survivors who'd found their own strength. This was her family now, not by blood but by choice and shared struggle and love. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, Eleanor sat in the nursery watching Hope sleep. The little girl was sprawled in her crib, arms thrown wide, completely trusting the world, so different from the fear Eleanor had carried during her pregnancy. "Your mama made a lot of mistakes," Eleanor whispered. "I stayed too long. I kept silent when I should have screamed. I let fear control me. But I want you to know something. Survival isn't pretty. It's not noble or dignified. Sometimes it means making choices that don't make sense to anyone else. Sometimes it means just getting through one more day. And that's okay. What matters is that I got us out. What matters is that you're here, safe and loved and free." Hope stirred in her sleep, one tiny hand reaching toward her mother even in dreams. Eleanor reached into the crib and gently held that small hand. "You're going to grow up knowing your worth. You're going to grow up strong. And if anyone ever tries to make you feel small or afraid or less than you are, you're going to walk away. Because you're my daughter and you're Thomas Rodriguez's granddaughter, and we don't bow to bullies. We survive. We fight back. And we win." Outside, the Connecticut night was peaceful. Inside, a mother and daughter were safe. And somewhere in a maximum security prison, Marcus Blackwell faced the beginning of a 40-year sentence. His power gone, his empire destroyed, his name synonymous with cruelty. Justice had been served. But more importantly, Eleanor had reclaimed her life. She was no longer Marcus Blackwell's victim. She was Hope's mother. She was a survivor. She was an advocate. She was free. And that was worth more than any verdict. If Elena's story moved you, if it made you think about the silent struggles people face behind closed doors, I hope you'll take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Share this story with someone who might need to hear it. Drop a comment below telling us what you think or sharing your own message of hope. Together we can break the silence around domestic violence and support survivors in their journey to freedom.